Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Just got back from 3 weeks of work in the Nahanni National Park Reserve near the Yukon, around the Liard River. I was hunted by a beast for 3 days before I ultimately decided to end my duties 4 days early. If interested, let me know and I'll post as much info as I can within the next 3 hours. Cheers. Was sent up alone to the Liard River in a desolate area to camp for 3 weeks. My duty was to study, sample, and report on the fish and wildlife in the area. When I was flying out with my pilot, who was a native of the general area, he told me, "You sure are brave working out here." I said, "Why?" He replied, "I've heard lots of stories that some big game roams around the laird, very large animals. I grew up hunting and brought a ton of shells, so it didn't worry me too much as I also got a briefing on the wildlife in the area." After we landed, I set up camp on a ridge that overlooked a mouth in the river. It was almost like a mini lagoon. I chose it because the land was flat and I had a great vantage point to overlook my general area. I also thought it would be a spot where bears wouldn't be interested in crossing due to it being high up and slightly out of the way of others, easier access to the river and some shrubbery with berries. Skip the first 2 weeks and get right to it. My time had become very regimented and monotonous. I started getting extremely bored. I never even saw one bear since I started. No tracks, no droppings, and no wasted food, other than elk, deer, fox, bird, and the late-night wolf pack howl that wasn't anywhere near. I didn't see much. One morning I woke up, must have been 6:30 or 7 a.m. I made coffee and had breakfast. I walked up to the ridge as I normally do, stretched. I took a sip of coffee and peered into the water and shorelines on either side. My eyes caught something out of place that I hadn't seen before. I looked out at this view every morning and got accustomed to everything in its rightful place, every tree, every log, and every rock. As I honed in, I noticed it was large, with black hair, and it was not a bear. In my stash somewhere, I had a small binocular. I abandoned the ledge and searched for it. As I already had spent 10 to 15 seconds going through a few bags, I had realized I am taking entirely too long. I ran back to the edge and it wasn't there anymore. I couldn't see any movement in the trees. This must have been about 400 to 450 meters away. I watched the same area for another 10 minutes and saw no signs. Continued on the job. What I saw didn't seem scary or threatening from what I saw from the distance, so I soon stopped thinking about it. I gathered some gear and headed down to the river to get data on contaminants in water. It must be about 11:30 a.m. now, maybe noon. I am getting bored of work. Kind of stop working and just chill. Look across the river. 100 meters to the right side of my view, I see a tall black thing beside a tree. I can see 1/4 of its face and half of its body hugging, trying to scope me out covert. I didn't panic. In fact, I acted as if I didn't notice it, but kept watching in a nonchalant fashion. I also found solace in the fact that it was on the other side of the river. It would have to travel about 1 kilometer south to the shallow part or 350 meters uphill northeast the other way to a fall and get across. After about 45 minutes, I realized this could go on forever. I stood up, turned around, and walked towards my camp. As I took 10 paces, I heard a blood-curdling shriek echo across the land. I felt like I had been shocked by a taser. I kind of double stutter stepped and looked in its direction. It was smashing through trees about 5 to 10 meters into the brush going towards the northeast side. I was scared. I ran to my gun, grabbed the shells, grabbed my utility knife, hatchet, and ran to a tree in the rear of my site that was tall and healthy. I climbed about 1/4 up it. Took me about 4 to 5 minutes. I sat up on a Y branch and had my gun ready to go. I waited and watched as I thought it would come if it crossed. I now have no view of the original bank I spoke of, but a view of a downside of my ridge towards the area it should come from. I wait. So I'm up in this Y branch maybe 13 or 15 feet off the ground. I could go higher if I want to, but I feel that's plenty, and I have good leaf coverage. I'm silent, waiting for this thing to make it up the northeast side. Remember, I can't see anymore, so for all I know, it quit. Now I got my eyes fixed on the area it should come up. 1 hour goes by, nothing, no sounds. If it really wanted me, it could have gotten to that area within 10 to 20 minutes if it moved briskly. I set my gun down in the Y. I climb as high as I go, and now I got a good view of the downhill side. What do I see? Zero. Nada. Chill for 20 minutes and watch. Nothing. I figure I better get down now and inspect on foot on the Riverview side. As I start climbing down, I hear what sounded like a gorilla doing its call. I froze solid stiff on the tree. I nearly crapped myself. It was loud, and it was coming from the downhill northeast side. I quickly realize it got there in under 10 minutes and it sees me, but I can't see it. I got to my gun, grabbed it, and went back up high as I'm scared. It's got to be about 3:30 or 4 now. I sit and scope the area. Nothing. I know it's there somewhere. I call out, "Aye." It echoes. Nothing. 5 minutes later, I hear that same scream I heard on the bank. It scared me so bad at the sheer ferocity and volume I almost fell out of the tree. Anyways, after I heard the crazy shriek, I started panicking because I could not see the thing and I was in a tree. All I could do was watch and listen. As about an hour went by, I could see on the northeast hillside black hair rise up in a crouching position behind some dense shrubbery. I realized this thing was laying down. What is it, I thought? The ape sound. Laying, crouching, and standing. I started putting 2 and 2 together. This has to be true. Sasquatch is real. It has to be. Now I'm really freaked out. I point my gun to the air at a 45 and shoot while I have my eye on the beast. It startled it as it dropped down, then stood up and jetted through the dense bush down the hill. I could only see glimpses of its shoulders and head here and there, but I knew I was scared. I stayed up there for another 25 or so minutes. I am certain now that it has been abandoned to the other side of the shore. I climbed down, so I got to the Riverview side. I see this mass of black walk across the falls, very, very long way away. I can barely see it. All I know is this thing is quite large, and I'm looking at it from nearly half a kilometer away on the northeast side. I thought this would be a good opportunity to head down to shore and grab my gear I left behind earlier. Achieved so within 15 or 20 minutes without problem. At this point, I had a lot of data, enough to make my superiors happy. I came to the decision and conclusion that I would stop work and focus on staying alive because I do not know anything about the creature that was said to be extinct or myth. Secondly, I threw the idea of switching camp while it was gone, then decided not to. It was too late in the day and that would have taken me a solid 2 to 4 hours. However, I decided to shift my tent right in front of the tree so I had access to it if anything came back. An escape route, if you will. I also quickly put a couple straps around the tree and threw it down a rough slope behind the tree as a holy shit last resort exit. I would have to hold rope and almost walk backwards down it. At the bottom of it is random brush, birch, and pine trees for a good 1.5 to 2 kilometers. Then it hits a bend from the river. At that point, there is some fast white water and a good current for a good 100 to 125 meters, traveling around a bend that ultimately leads to the connection near my camp. After I shifted my tent in complete paranoia, I ate a quick meal of granola bars and jerky. I had a bunch of beer cans from the past couple weeks. I strung 24 cans across a fishing line and tied it 2 feet off the ground, 5 to 8 meters outside of my camp in the brush. I thought it could work as a sort of alarm system if the thing came back later on while I was sleeping. After I strung it up, I went back up into the tree with my gun. At this point in time, it's quite late. I'd say 7:30 or 8 o'clock. There is sunlight, but not very much left. As I got halfway up the tree on a big, thick branch that came off at a 45-degree angle, I calmly watched the landscape, especially that side it was at earlier. I could see some of the beer cans from my vantage point. I didn't hear or see anything of what happened earlier after a solid 2.5 hours. I was exhausted. I figured I had scared it away with that one shot I blasted off earlier. Although I wasn't completely at ease and still frightened, I was quite content with going down to the tent and sleeping. Instead of getting into my sleeping bag, I unzipped it and laid it over my body like a normal blanket, in case I had to make a quick escape up the tree. I didn't want to be messing around with zippers in the dark. I got comfy, listened, and stared at the top of my tent for a good 5 or 10 minutes, reflecting on what had happened. I came to peace with it and started thinking about going home, then passed out. I hear clanging. I was asleep for God knows how long. Quickly snap out of it. It's the beer cans clanging together softly and getting quieter and quieter. I knew it tripped it and it's already on my sight or just tested it. Grab the gun and sneak out the rear flap, hug the tree in a crouched position, and spin around it to the rear side of the tree covert style. I'm somewhat concealed due to the night tent and girth of the tree. Pull myself up on the first branch, then quickly climb branches as if it were a ladder. As I climb, I am looking and listening. Can't see or hear anything. The sound of cans have stopped. There is a slight breeze, so I think it's possible. A gust of wind moved the beer cans. I stop at a nice position halfway up, overlooking my campsite and the northeast side. I look to my right flank and see a black figure, a massive black figure at that. It's not moving. Almost looks like a tree stump cut off at the 6 or 7 foot mark, and you were looking at it in the dark. It then made a huff sound from its nostrils and moved forward towards the tree. I made a whimpering sound and yelled, "Yah!" It grunted and ran for the brush. Now I know this thing has a very serious interest in me. I think I am in its territory, or it was passing through and seen its first human. Whatever the reason, I thought doesn't really matter. I don't know anything about this animal or what it is capable of. I also don't want to kill it if possible. Now I am just standing up in my tree watching. I can't hear it in the brush now, but I know it is there watching me in the tree. I decided to go higher. I get up high and wait. After about 30 minutes, I see not only one, but 3 other black figures crouch out of the brush into my sight. They all stand and slowly walk and crouch around the campsite. I couldn't help but think about what I have gotten myself into. I don't get paid enough to risk my life like this. They should have known the area was dangerous and to give me better weaponry. I have a 12 gauge and shells. This is sufficient at close range, but I'd much prefer a hunting rifle with a sight. After my poor me reflection, I started thinking on the bright side. I yelled, "Aye," and they all froze and seemed to have looked in my direction. The problem is I could not fully see them. They're black and it's dark. I could basically only see their silhouette. One of them started making a gorilla-like noise. It stood and moved forward as the others hung back. I assumed this was the alpha of the crew. In the midst of this, I almost thought out loud, what is happening? This cannot be real. Due to sheer fear and ignorance of what these things are capable of, I didn't want them anywhere near. I pointed my gun to the ground 6 feet ahead of the alpha and sent a blast. I don't know if some of the pellets had ricocheted into its shins or not, but it sent it back to the crew, and they fled into the bush. I could hear them crashing down the northeast hill. I stayed up in my tree until the break of dawn with no more encounters. When the sun was high and bright enough, I got a good sight again of the northeast side and my campground. It was clear. I decided to call my pilot and tell him to come and get me. I picked up my sat phone and got through. "Hey man, it's Quinn. Can you come get me ASAP? I've got all the data I need." "I thought you were coming out a bit later." "I was supposed to, but I got more than enough data. No need for me to stay here." "Well, sorry to tell you, but I have to get a new fuel pump put in. Mine is shittered. It's being flown out as we speak." "Well, how long will that take?" "I'll be able to fly as early as tomorrow morning." "Okay, well, can you come here tomorrow morning, man? Not to be a dick, but I want to get the hell out of here, man." "Yeah, sure, what's wrong? Bored?" "Yeah, man, I'm bored to death. Think I'm going crazy." "Yeah, no problem, Quinn. I'll be there at about 10 a.m. tomorrow. Hang tight, buddy." I was happy he was coming for me earlier than planned, but I was sincerely depressed. I had another 26 or 27 hours of this. I felt an immense amount of anxiety that I was dealing with an unknown creature that had home turf advantage, as well as a numbers advantage. I was thinking of transporting all of my stuff and camp down to that fast current area, which was 2 kilometers southeast of my camp. I thought maybe it could buy me time and confuse these things. I figured if I could tough it out down over there, I could portage my things along the shoreline to the mini lagoon the next morning, which would be about a 3 to 5 kilometer trek if I followed the water bends. In theory, it sounded good, but part of me did not want to leave. I have good visibility in this massive tree. It seems to have done me good thus far. I wrestled with the idea for a solid hour as I watched the landscape. I saw nothing. My thought process was interrupted when nature called. I grabbed my gun and walked to the edge of camp. I was in between my tent and the Riverview lookout. I sit on a log and lean on the gun and do my business. Just as I am finishing the deed, I see a black mass peer at me from the northeast side. I look at it, it's looking at me. I have excellent visibility of it right now. I can see its shoulders, traps, and head. This thing looks like a less muscular gorilla that stands very tall. The difference being a gorilla's head sits on its traps. There is no neck. This thing had large traps but a long neck then a head. I quickly pull my pants up and point the gun at it. This thing is not moving or making any noise. I crouch down with my eyes on it and grab a small log. I underhand throw it like a horseshoe in its direction, lands 10 feet in front of it. It crouches and starts making that gorilla noise again. As it's doing this, I am slowly strafing towards my tree. I hear that god-awful shriek come from deeper in the woods on the northeast side. It must be one of its friends. As I get to my tent, it stands. I crouch behind my tent and try scaling it. I look around the opposite side of my tent, and the thing is standing on the east flank, maybe 25 feet from me. Oh shit, I thought. I am not going to make it up the tree. I grab the strap and give it shit down that rough, jagged edge. I hear that yell. Now my adrenaline has been tapped and I am wide-eyed scared. I get to the bottom of the face and jet towards the river. I quickly glance back over my shoulder as I run, and I see a few clumps of black masses coming down the ledge. I look in front of me and run as fast as I can in complete fear. I realize I don't have my gun. I don't even remember what I did with it. I am running full tilt. I can hear branches and grunting behind me quite a ways. I know they're after me now. I realize I have to be in their territory, and they want me out. All of a sudden, in front of me to my left, I hear a shriek echo through. Hang a right and keep going. I am starting to gas out. I can feel a cramp in my stomach, but I soldier on. This is life or death, I thought. I continually hear branches breaking behind me and grunting. I looked behind me and saw nothing but some trees moving maybe 20 meters behind me. These guys are fast, very fast. I had a sizable head start, and I'm pretty sure they had trouble making it down that cliff. So I thought. This sight and realization really tripped my inner flight gene we all have. I dug down deep and booked it. Just as I am catching my second wind, I hear the rush of white water. I can see the clear whiteness through the leaves and branches. I dash for it. I get to the shore, turn and look. I see the black masses smashing around in the brush and getting closer. I thought I couldn't run anymore. This isn't going to work. I look into the river rushing around the bend. I decided to jump in. This was probably one of the most dangerous things I have ever done. In fact, I get really lucky here. When I get in the water, it's ice cold, freezing. The current is moving rapidly, but I am too close to the shoreline, so I decide to paddle out deeper. Oh, great .jpg. This is the first time I ever been swimming in a rapid-filled run of a river and no life preserver. As it took me, I struggled to keep my head above water. The first white cap engulfs my head and takes me under. I can't swim up. I feel like I am stuck in a cyclone or something. I curl up in a ball and I sink deeper, and then a current catches me and pushes me further down. I now swim up to the surface. I gasp and choke. Another wave smashes me and I go under. At this very point, I think I am a goner. I am completely gassed out. No energy. I don't even care about the animals anymore, and I think about my wife and kids. They're never going to find me and I am dead. I come back up to the surface and there are no more rapids. Just the current, but it's of no use. I am not strong enough to swim out of it. I just float through the course. I see a tree and a bunch of big-ass rocks sticking out of the river. I thought this is my only chance not to drown. I grab the branches and hang on for must be 2 seconds. It was enough to stop my body's acceleration in the river. It was strong enough to break my grip. Then I smash into the rock 3m past it. The current has me pinned on the rock. I kind of worked my way around to a spot that had a lot of edges and cuts. I climbed it. I get 3/4 of my body out of water and onto the rock. I lay on it face down and thought that was probably the dumbest move I had ever made in my life. If it wasn't for that tree and rock, I would have drowned without a doubt. That was sheer luck. I looked at how far I had gone. It must have been about 150 meters of white water. That might not seem like a long run, but with no life preserver and after running from a pack of animals for a couple kilometers, it's enough to put many out of commission, believe me. As I look down the river, I cannot see the creatures. After 10 minutes of laying on the rock, I get up. I feel immense pain on my left side where my ribs are. It was when I smashed into the rock. I think a couple may be cracked. I walk the shoreline for about 3 or 4 kilometers. I get to the mini lagoon where my camp is. I go up the Riverview path to my site where all my gear is trashed. I crouch low and view the northeast side bush. Don't see anything. I notice my rifle laying in the dirt behind the tent and tree. I get up and make a dash for it, grab it and look to the northeast and east side. Right now I am mad. I am thinking, screw the environment and these animals. Yes, I am intruding on their land, but I got a family and I'm not dying. Nothing comes out, nothing is around. I look at my caved-in tent and food supplies all over the site. I look at one black case that is still intact. Thank God, I thought. That is what gets me a paycheck. It's still good. I grab some granola bars and eat them like a pig. Pound a liter of water without stopping. I climb the tree and stay there with my gun. This time I am not leaving. I don't see the things for the rest of the afternoon and night, not even a sound. I pass out on the Y branch sitting up. I awoke at dawn in the same position. I didn't see the things anywhere near. No signs. I still stayed up in that tree for hours. Then I heard a buzz, a familiar sound I hadn't heard since I got there. The bush plane is back. Thank God. He lands it in the lagoon. I climb down, grab my black case and make my way to the plane. He's on the pilot side floater and says, "Bud, you look like garbage, haha." I look at him with a grin and say some bears crashed my party. Forget about my belongings and let's go, man. I went back home and didn't tell anyone anything. I told my wife and she said I should post my story on the internet anonymously. That's where I found you guys. If you don't believe this story, it's cool. I am just happy to be alive. Oh, and my ribs. They're fine. No crack or breaks. I'd like to hear other stories if you got any, or general flaming is welcome. Hope you guys appreciate the story. Thanks for listening.
Dude, that's insane. Thanks for finishing it. So now that time has passed and you've had time to analyze it, what do you and your wife think it was?
I definitely think it was Bigfoot or Sasquatch. The way they moved, looked, and the noises they made were all very, very similar to the gorilla and ape, although very, very large. I still had a feeling the gorilla is much wider and more muscular. No doubt this thing is tall, but the gorilla is wider and more muscular. They seemed more intelligent than your average ape. Maybe why they have survived and stayed unnoticed for so long. At the end of the day, I think it is just a different species of monkey with a lot of bullshit stigmatization and dumb spooky names. Yes, it was dangerous, but so are gorillas.
At 9 out of 10, the weight killed me a bit. OP, what is your job title and what do you actually do? Do you think the sassies would have killed you had you not decked it into the river, and when was this?
I work for the Ministry of the Environment as a fish and wildlife technologist, which is my technical title. There are a few small groups of us that are willing to do the deep wood excursions. A lot of new mining and oil drilling jobs have been taking place up north, so we will go and study the impacts it has caused on the environment. This will be my only excursion of 2013. Probably do another in 2014 in a completely different area. Oh, and to answer your other question, I had the feeling they wanted to hurt me or run me off their territory at the very least. That's why they were chasing me and screaming. It's possible they would have been scared if I stood my ground. However, I didn't want to take that chance. The river was idiotic, but it worked out, so I can't really say it was a mistake. If I went back with what I know now, I would have risked the Sasquatch. That river is no joke. In fact, I am terrified of whitewater rapids now. I'll never go whitewater rafting or kayaking, screw that.
OP, if they got near your campsite, wouldn't they have left tracks?
OP here. They seemed curious at first. Well, the one seemed curious. They also were obviously aggressive. Why, I think I was in their backyard. A part of their very, very large backyard. So I understand. There were some tracks, yes. Nothing impressive. Intact, they weren't very clear, but they were basically large human feet, like between 12 to 15 inches long. They weren't very impressive, though.
Nahanni National Park is in Northwest Territories, many kilometers away from Yukon. Liard River is by Fort Simpson above Alberta. OP is a drunk Indian and/or idiot and liar.
The most significant number of the Liard runs through the Northwest Territories. The smaller sections run through Yukon and parts of British Columbia. I went to Yukon because there was some fly-by-night drilling around that neck of the woods. If you don't believe me, here is a link to prove it. Definitely not a native, but I am probably going to be drunk in 2 hours.
You got any more stories? That was great.
Unfortunately for you guys, and fortunately for me, that was my only Bigfoot experience. I have other stories of strange things in the woods on a previous excursion, but nothing to do with Bigfoot or an animal, possibly paranormal, but I have had no hard proof.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more Greentexts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.